Hi, I'm Standa. I'm one of the DotVVM developers, and in the third presentation today, I would like to show you what we are essentially still working on, but it's released in DotVVM 4.0 in like the experimental stage. I would like to show you our integration with JavaScript components. The idea is that you might want to use some existing like React components or whichever framework you like in the .vvm application, and there is a ton of free and actually quite well-written React components on the internet or on in like the npm repository, and also many commercial components have React bindings. The commercial components usually started as like jQuery or jQuery style APIs, but nowadays basically everything has React bindings and probably some other frameworks. Now we basically mostly focus on React because it's the most used one, but we want to add support for multiple frameworks later. So in this presentation, I would like to show you basically what we came up with, what works, and how you can use it. And I would also like to show you like what we plan to do and kind of how it works on the high level. So as I said, the main motivation is to use existing components, but like a secondary and not that unimportant motivation is to be able to use, to be able to write some complex client-side code, because some tasks are really tedious in like pure.vvm, or you would have to write also some custom JavaScript, which is then hard to integrate with the knockout observables that we use. And I don't want to say that knockout is like a bad framework. It's certainly like fallen out of fashion these days, but it's not bad for templating. I would say it's quite tedious to use when you want to write components. So we basically already have multiple APIs for integrating client-side code with .vvm. Like from the first versions of .vvm when it was called Redwood back in the day, if some of you remember. It was based on Knockout and Knockout.js, where you can write custom binding handlers, and these can be used seamlessly from .vvm. You essentially don't even need to integrate it with .vvm, since you can just include the data bind attribute in your .html code, bind it to some view model property, and it will just work. And most of our components are actually written this way. Basically all of business spec components, if you have used them, and also most .vvm bootstrap components have some custom binding handlers. However, for writing custom code, which is more involved than just calling some function from the bootstrap library, it's sometimes a bit annoying because Knockout does not offer much abstraction above the DOM API. And you also have to handle a lot of Knockout specific edge cases, so it's maybe even worse than like writing it in jQuery. So quite some time ago, I think it's at least 3 years, maybe even more, I wrote like a proof of concept, a React bridge, which still is in .vvm contrib. I am afraid it kind of stopped working and nobody complained, so probably nobody ever used it. But it was like a proof of concept that it was possible to actually integrate React components with .vvm even some time ago. And we used it for some demos and not for much else. There are some major problems with the React bridge, mostly that it was really annoying to use with JavaScript modules and with bundlers such as Webpack, which is kind of required to use if you want to use any third-party React component or class. So in this way it wasn't super useful, because the limitations were clashing with the real life requirements. Last year, Tomáš, mostly Tomáš, was writing Fluent UI integration using web components. Web components have the advantage over like React components that we essentially don't have to do any work to make it work, because web component is exported as like a virtual HTML element. So there is like no way .vvm wouldn't support this, because .vvm just renders HTML. So yeah, you can use web components, but there are also some limitations, like binding two ways is like, it's not impossible, but it's not like as trivial as it would seem, because Knockout can write the values into attributes, but it cannot read them back from attributes, because normal HTML elements just don't change their attributes on their own. So we had to write some custom Knockout handlers to make this work with the Fluent UI. And it's quite annoying also to send any more complex object than like a number or a string through the HTML attributes, because HTML attributes are only strings. So now we are working on another integration. We call it JS Components. It should essentially not have all the limitations that I just told you. So it will be based on JavaScript modules, compatible with bundlers. We use rollup mostly, because it's like simple and works. And we also want to make it work with React components and maybe something else. So, as I said, it's based on ECMAScript modules or JavaScript modules if you have used them. It's based on our @JS directive. I don't know how popular it is. A lot of people in our company use it, but I don't know about everyone else. But it's a way to include an JavaScript module into a .vvm page and then integrate it with the page. So you can call functions on the module from .vvm bindings, from commands, or even from value bindings. And with this support, you can now also export components from that module that you just loaded in the page into .vvm. And currently, we have like a first-class support for React, and we also support Svelte, because I like the framework, so I just wrote the integration. I will show you later. It's really not hard. It's like 10 lines of code to get basic React support, and basically the same for Svelte. So if you are using some obscure JavaScript framework, just get in touch, and I will happily help you to integrate it as well. It supports bindings. They work two ways in Svelte, only one way in React, because React just doesn't have two-way bindings. But what you do in React, I will show in a moment. You just add a command into there, or static command, which is basically an event handler for the like unchanged event. So if you, I don't know, have a text box and you bind into it the value, and then you bind it out of it using a like unchanged event. And it also supports templates that can be placed into the components. That's a bit more involved. I will not show it today, but we support it. And we are still working on it, so please keep in mind that there might be some rough edges. I don't want to discourage you from using this API. Just expect that if you do something non-trivial with it, there might be rough edges. But if you encounter those, please get in touch. We will happily help you. And second, most importantly for us, we will get some feedback on it and maybe fix the problem actually. So let me show you a demo. I found a nice React component on the internet. It's called React dgraph. Dgraph means like directed graph. It basically shows, here you can see an animated demo. It renders an SVG elements which show like a combinatory graph or a diagram. So you have nodes and edges, and it will just render those. It has quite complex API. So it's the usage won't be as simple. Here you can see like a simplified example usage. The usage won't be as simple as like now just export this function to the VVM. Maybe it would be possible, I don't know, but it's probably even like more educational to show that the better way is to write your own component that will wrap the functionality from this one which you need to use, and then export your own component to the DotVVM so that you can avoid some rough edges of the API by binding simpler objects and simplifying the events and so on. And we will also do like a backwards data binding, because the component allows changing the position of these events. It also allows adding new edges, but I was too lazy to implement support for that. So we will only support binding the positions back into the view model, and I will show you that you can then modify it either in the .vvm page or then in the React component. It doesn't matter, it will be bound together. So let's start. I have prepared a demo. I don't want to embarrass myself even more, so I don't want to do any live coding today. So it's already implemented. I will just show you how it's done, and then we will have a look how it works. So first, there is like the boring part where we have to set up all the JavaScript build systems things. We can't simply import the JavaScript module into the page because React essentially doesn't work this way. We even had to do some like slight hacks in the rollup config. React has these references to process.env, .nodeEnv, so it will not even work in the browser if you just load it. You have to essentially compile the JavaScript using a bundler like Webpack, or here we use rollup because it works nicely with ECMAScript modules. However, the setup is fairly simple. This is basically the boilerplate that you always need for rollup. This is like, okay, we want to use TypeScript. This is a hack for React that everybody uses. And then there is like an optional minification step. So nothing super complicated. If you didn't see this, maybe you are just scratching your head, what the hell is this? But it's essentially like from any template you would copy paste it. I also pre-installed some packages. It's mostly the rollup plugins and this React dgraph package. And I didn't use it here, but that's not super important. I also imported this .vvm.js component React package. That's like the important entry point to the React integration API. It's an npm package. We cannot distribute it together with the NuGet.vvm package, or maybe we could, but it would be like complicated, and you need npm anyway for importing React. So this is a simple way to do it. So we just import React, we import the .vvm integration, which is only this function, register React component, and we import the necessary stuff from the React digraph library. I will not go into details how this library is used. That's kind of off topic. You can just quickly glance through the code. I will show some slide details later. And then the important part from .vvm point of view is that you export like initializer function which returns an object which has these dollar controls. It's called dollar controls because anything which is not dollar prefixed is like a command that you can invoke from the .vvm JavaScript. So .vvm will expect that if you write something in here like test and I don't know, we will not call it so we don't get the alert, but this will be like an invocable JavaScript command from .vvm page. You can learn more about it in like our documentation. If you don't know it and want to do something more involved with .vvm, definitely have a look at this. I think it's super powerful. Okay, now back to the components. So we call this register React component, which is essentially a function which gets the component and wraps it into like a .vvm compatible API. We have designed some like framework agnostic API for .vvm so that we don't have to import React into .vvm, which would increase the bundle size like 3 times. So we didn't want to include React in .vvm, so we added some like React-ish API, and it also allows us seamlessly to integrate Svelte or any other framework that we will later want to utilize. So the React component, if you didn't see in React, a React component can be just a function which gets like its properties and returns an HTML element. This is like a special JSX syntax. It's not valid JavaScript, but it's also one of the reasons why we need the pre-compilation step. So these properties we get from .vvm. It's used here in the .html page. Maybe I will increase the font size slightly. And here we use js.diagram, which is a reference to this name. So we register the component as diagram. Here we use it as diagram. And all the attributes that we add here will be passed here in the props object. So we just use JavaScript deconstructions to get all of them. We are rendering like a graph, so we need nodes and edges. And here are 2 events, like one for the node position is changed and one for selection changed, because we can also select nodes in this library. We just transform whatever we have in the view model. I will show you what we have in the model. It's just very simple view model with there are nodes, each has a position. We have a list of nodes in the model, and then we have a list of edges. And edge is just a from and to name of the node. I was too lazy to add some numeric IDs. So we transform whatever we have in the .vvm view model into whatever the React component expects. And here I have another component which is stateful this time, because they had it in the example this way. I didn't want to bother too much with adjusting the example, so I like it more. So this is a stateful React component, and it handles like this on update and on select, so that we can then bind it back to the .vvm view model. It's not super important whatever is here. We just take the edges that we created here and nodes that we created here and pass it into this graph view component, which is imported from the package. So, does it work? I had it running. I am not sure if it was the latest version, so I will just build it and just run .NET Run again. I think I should have it open here. Yeah. So this is the React component that we included. It has these 3 edges. The custom field is like a type of the node. That's also copy pasted from the example. You will probably want to have something your own here. And you see the names here, and that the links are just as we specified in the .vvm view model. So this essentially proves that we can bind data from .vvm into React. So does it work the other way? Here I have placed the table of the node positions. These are the default positions that you can see in the view model. The table, if you are wondering, is just implemented as a simple repeater over all nodes. And we can also edit the positions client side. Nothing spectacular, just to prove that it works. And when I drag the component, I will also show you the debug window. Because I placed some debug print so we can see whatever is going on. I can drag the component slightly, and you see nothing is changing because the GraphLink library does not trigger any events when it's being dragged. But now when I leave the mouse button, it triggers an event on update node, which has this that node 1 was updated with these positions. That's printed from here. And from here I also invoke the .vvm event, node changed, which is bound here into a static command. If you don't know, static command is like a command binding that you are used to from .vvm, but it works only client side. So this does no request to the web server, because it's pointless to do a request just to update position of one node. And you can see that like we can use first or defaults to find the node that we are interested in and then just set the position. You can also pass more complex values like this position view model. Like it's not super complex view model, like to be honest, but it's not a simple string value. Here we created in JavaScript in this like object literal or however it's called. So this is how it works, and you can see that whenever I drag this node, there is an updated position. And naturally, when I change it in here, in this text box, the position of the node also changes, so I can just reset it back to 0, 0. Oops, now it's overlapping, so I can just drag this away. Okay. So this was fairly simple, and just to show you like one potential, not a trap, but pitfall potential. I also added support for this selection changed. Whenever we click on a node, or I hold Ctrl-Shift and select it, we can select some nodes from the graph. And the React component has this onSelect event where we get the selection, where we have a list of nodes. If it's empty, they use null, so I just translate it to an empty array because I think that's more natural, at least in the .vvm world. And I take all the nodes that are selected and trigger an .vvm event here, which just updates the selected array. And I show the sorry, not this one. The selected array is also in this table as a list of checkbox. So you can see that node 1 and node 2 is selected. And when I unselect them, they are unselected, and so on. So it works very nicely. And you would expect now, or maybe you wouldn't because you see the problem, but you could expect that when I click on this, it will select the node, but it does not. And the reason is very simple. We just only bind it from the React component, but there is no like, we would have to do like selection is equal to value dot selected. And then I don't want to do it now. As I said, I don't want to do live coding session. But then we would have to take it from here into the graph. And from the graph, we would have to set this selected field. And now it's slightly problematic because the selection is also persisted in the React component. So we would probably have to ditch the state and just use the property from .vvm. But like, it works as long as you don't expect it to bind it the other way. And obviously you will also encounter similar trap if you bind it only from .vvm. Like, if you wouldn't have this node changed here. Now I can drag the component however I want, and it will not update. You can see that it always drags it back because now it didn't drag it back. I don't know why. Usually it drags it back because the .vvm view model still says that the component should, or this custom node 2 should be at this location. And I think that it does not sometimes go back because it only updates when something changes, and actually nothing changes here, so it's not updated. But I'm not sure. I don't want to claim I know why it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So you have to bind it explicitly to ways with React. Oftentimes you will find out that you will also have to do it with Svelte, but in very simple cases, like when you are binding a simple string property or simple integer property, it will work both ways with Svelte because it kind of has some basic support for two-way binding, so you will avoid kind of writing this. And I don't want to say the code is ugly, but it may seem kind of unnecessary when it's just updating the nodes back. So that's all from me for now. I just want to encourage you to, if you have a use case where this would help you, please try it out. And if you encounter any problems or some rough edges, even when you figure out to overcome them, feel free to just report to us, hey, we tried this and it didn't work, so we had to work around it. And maybe we'll find a way to like lift the limitations of it. And also, if you want to have a support for some your favorite client-side framework, I know there is like a dozen of them that are actually used, and probably thousands of them that are not used that much. You can try to write the integration yourself. I can show you like a quick glance. Like this is all you need for the React integration to work. There is some code above that's to make like the knockout templates work, but I didn't even show you that today. I don't think it will be too useful. So in most cases, when you want to use the integration yourself in your application, you will probably be fine with only this piece of code. So I don't know if you like Vue, I don't know basically anything about Vue.js, but if you like Vue, and you know something about it, you know how to translate this React code into Vue, I think it will be pretty easy for you to actually integrate it. Or I don't know if you like something more obscure, feel free to try. And we have some plans to, as I said here earlier, most of our components now are written using the knockout binding handlers. We will probably try to switch some of them to this new API. We have been trying to do that for the business factory view. I don't want to promise that it will happen, but oops. But we will at least try. It's not that simple as I showed you now, because there is like many knockout templates with changing data contexts, and that's not very well handled by the current state of the API. But I don't think you will need it all that often in like real applications. So that's all from me. Thank you for your attention, and feel free to contact us if you want to know anything more. Are there any questions in the chat? One question.
Is the DotVVM React diagram demo repo available?
No, because I wrote it this like afternoon, and so I still didn't make it available. But I will certainly do that. Like there is no reason to keep this private. Also, if you want a few more examples of the usage, we have some of them in our like official. Oh, not this one. In our .vvm repository, what did I do wrong? I'm not connected to internet. Okay, that's the issue. But anyway, in our .vvm repository, I can show you here in VS Code. We have the samples folder, and let me quickly. Here in the common directory, there are a few examples of the usage with React and with Svelte, because we need to test it that it still works. So these are our framework UI tests. But you can also have a look. like these are more simple than what I showed today. There is some chart which is only a one-way binding from the view model into the React component, and here there is a template selector to prove that there are like templating support works. So if you would need to use the templating, you can also have a look here how it works. And with Svelte there is something very similar. There is this incrementer component, which is interesting in the way that it is just incrementing the property which it's using, and it is binding two-way to the .DotVVM view model. But I will definitely make this repository available. So I guess that's all. Thank you for your attention, and maybe see you on another video.